All right. Well, welcome everyone to the final apologetics night at this location. So welcome. Glad you guys are here. Part of me wants to take everything off the screens and the boards because we're not going to have it at the new place, but let's use it one more night, So I'll draw lots of pictures. There's lots to talk about, lots to go over. Announcement-wise, we're going to finish up the book we're in. But let me go through a couple announcements. Let me get some sort of housekeeping out of the way. So this location we're in right now, tonight is the last night that we're here meeting, okay? So on Saturday, we're going to be moving out of here. So this is it. We're going to be gone. So Tuesday night will be on hold for, I'm guessing, 3 weeks. Boo. Okay, so the week of the 19th, May 19th is the week I'm guessing. Paul won't tell you this, but I'm guessing we'll be back. So that gives us 3 weeks of you not having this Tuesday nights. And so during those times, feel free to hang out with each other and to go do things. You don't need to come here to do that. But I will miss you. I will be there. We'll try to, this last minute, because we're moving, it's not because the new place is ready. We're moving because we're done here. So there's things to pray for, and we're almost in. So we're waiting to get the final approval on our permits, which we're almost there. The occupancy and all that stuff's happening. So it's all kind of in motion. And so the goal would be starting on that week of probably the 19th, we'll be meeting again and starting our Tuesday night. So a couple changes. In the fall, we're going to add to the Tuesday night downstairs apologetics, we're going to add upstairs a thing called Adventure Club. It's essentially like a Grace Community Church Awanas, essentially, if you will, that we're going to be running. It'll be for all the ages of youngins, and then by the time your kids are teens, they should be here. So that's what we want. You don't have to come, but it's available now, so you can have your kids up there. All of it's going to start at 6 p.m., not 7 p.m. Now, that's not to make your life miserable. Some of you is like, it's so hard. But, that gets you out a little sooner. You'll live. Let's see what happens. If no one shows up at 6 p.m., I guess it's the worst. But to me, we're starting after a 3-week break. Let's just start up at 6 p.m. So because of that, we're not going to be doing the dinner thing because it's all going to be in the new sanctuary. So that's going to be different. So every time we've changed, I just want to prepare you for it because you guys are truly sort of the pioneers. And so you guys, everything y'all do is, what do you want to call it? Like George Washington, when he was the first president, he knew that everything he did was setting precedent going forward. Right? So everything you do going forward sort of sets a little bit precedent for this new place. So I'm excited about that. So the 6 p.m. time will be downstairs. And so there's going to be some different things because it'll be that giant room with the pulpit. So it'll feel a little more formal. And so that's not on purpose. It's just that's how it is. And so it is what it is. So you're going to lose something because of that formality. You're going to lose some of the feeling that we're in a living room right now. But just notice that those of you here tonight are here, but the people at the last ministry center lost a lot because previously when we met, we didn't have cameras, and it was like a question and answer Q&A. I was even more candid than I am now, and so people liked that. And it went crazy. We had at one point, if you remember, we did for 2 hours instead of one. We did apologetics and a theology. So there's all sorts of changes. Before all that, it used to be in my living room. So this would be in my living room with all of you invited, using all my toilet paper, drinking all our sodas, and then most of you would end up staying till 3 a.m. And so people would stay till 3 a.m. playing Call of Duty and video games or smoking cigars. So that would just be at my house, which as much as I love all y'all, it's nice to not be at my house with that because that's a pretty big burden on the house. And so each time, though, you lose something and you gain something different. It's just important to acknowledge that. When we go to the new place, we're not trying to recast this place. It's going to be something new in the sense of the venue. It'll feel new. Also, tonight we're going to finish the book we're in, and so then when we meet on our next meeting, we're going to be doing a new book. The book is going to be, let me see really quick. Hold on. So the new book is going to be Street Smarts by Greg Kukl. It's going to be all about, essentially, Kukl wrote tactics, and so this is going to be more of an apologetics. I've done a lot of theory, teaching you theory. This is going to be all about sort of a little bit more methodology. So if some of you want to know how to have these conversations, what are strategies when you talk to someone that believes X, Y, or Z, that's what that new book will be about. So it'll be a little bit more overtly about how to sort of do apologetics in the world. And so I think it'll be fun. So we'll do that book, and then after that, we'll get into something really heavy and meaty and crazy. So that's kind of the next book we'll do. So if you want to get it, Kukels, Street Smarts, that'll be in like 3 weeks. Then we won't have screens up here. So you won't have screens to do all this. So it's going to be just you having to hear me talk. All right. So there's going to be that. Now there's some benefits to that. I love screens. We've been doing screens and tech for a long, long time. But there's something amazing about a pulpit and just the word. And I love that. So it'll just be fun in that way. It'll still be on the internet, so you don't have to make it, but I think it'll be a fun time. In the sanctuary downstairs, we will have an area with like belly bars that are kind of goes out into the back where we'll have, I don't know, basketball hoops. And for those of you that like to play that sport, we'll probably have the cornhole so you can hang out and just do your thing. So that'll all be there. And because it'll be a little bit earlier, it's easier to hang out afterwards without feeling like those of you that have bedtimes that are normal people. I'm starting to learn to respect those of you that go to bed at normal intervals, but that'll be there. So that's going to be new. That's let's just guess that we'll have 3 weeks off. That's my guess. All right. So that's the plan. So coming up, we're going to be moving out of, like I said, here this week, and then we're moving out of the sanctuary in a couple weeks, and then that's when we're basically ready to go moving in. So we're excited about that. So tonight, one of the things that would help me out, if anyone is interested, so here's an opportunity to serve. We have a bunch of boxes over here. And so either right now or afterwards, if any of you are interested, I need to box up all my books. And I would love to not do it. So I would love for you to do it for me. No, I'm just kidding. But if anyone wants to volunteer to help out, we just need to take these book boxes, and all the books in my office on the bookshelf and all the bookshelf in the back are all going to go into my new office. And if you want to help out, we're going to box those books and just label it Matt's office. And so if we do that tonight, that would help me out a lot. If you don't want to do it, no problem. But if anyone's interested, you don't need to raise your hand. Just do it, right? So make sure you label it Matt's office and just put the boxes outside. So there's, again, in the back room there's books on a bookshelf, and then upstairs in my office in the back corner, just fill them up with books. And if you find like weird things, just put them in the box. So it should be fine. My office, you might find an Eye of Newt or something. I don't know. But that's that. So anyone, who thinks they might want to help out with some book boxes? Anyone? Okay, we got a couple of helps. All right. Yeah, so we'll do that. That would be great, and we can bang that out. So let me see if there's anything else I can think of. That's about it for now. So let me say a prayer, and then we'll start into this chapter and then end this book. So God, thank you so much for what you've done bringing us here to this ministry center. Lord, many people became and started enjoying the church after we were here, but I just remember coming here when it was an empty warehouse. I remember being scared, Father, because we didn't know how we would afford it. Being nervous, it was during COVID, how people were going to hear about it. I was excited about the furniture and the first time the doors were open. I remember, Lord, being nervous because for the first time ever, we were putting it all on camera and the change that all was, and you blessed it. And Lord, as we leave here, it just seems like yesterday that we came in. And I just pray we go forward with expectation. We're very excited about this next chapter in this church. And I just pray that you would use these Tuesday night apologetics classes to really benefit your people, edify your people. I pray that it would benefit those that are watching online, but that it would continue to grow and be useful in our mission and what we're doing. Lord, help us to celebrate what you've accomplished and what you're going to accomplish. Give us a sense of expectation. Give us a sense of being a part of something you're doing. It's exciting. Help us to celebrate through all of it and enjoy the changes. Give us patience, Lord, as we experience the growing pains of being in new locations. And as we leave here, help us to, again, celebrate all the work you've done and the ministry you've done here in this place. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. So this is going to be an exciting thing, and there's so many dreams, you just can't believe it, that we've come from here. Again, to start this church off, it started with literally like 2 couches, and that was a whole church. And so just to have a Tuesday night like this and what God's doing is fun. All right, so the book we're in tonight, we're finishing up, is called Ordinary, and I told you we're going to do the last chapter. I mean the second to last chapter, but the last chapter is just a summary. And so this book, Ordinary, if I can kind of remind you why I did it. And what I want to do with this book, Ordinary, the book is all about re-enchantment. Okay, so that's kind of the premise here. And I just had dinner with a wonderful family the other night, and we were talking a little bit, And, just like getting plugged in the church and what it looks like. And I just want to remind the family I was with that just how special it is that they're raising children and they have jobs, they have ministries. And yes, we want you plugged in, but you're doing ministry. It's so great. And, I know that they've heard me say that before. And, it's funny because when I meet you and we talk one-on-one, I'm really the exact same person. This is all I am. There's no other side to me. I'm not multifaceted at all. I say the same things when I talk privately as I do publicly. And that's what I was talking about. I'm like, yeah, the things we do on the side matter. And I really, truly, and actually mean that. One of the examples I'm going to give, and this is going to help you understand where I mean by ordinary, thinking of extraordinary things is often about hype in the church. And if you think about it, it's very easy for me to be a hype man. What I mean by that is I could get up here and sell you whatever next programmatic thing we're doing, and I could do that pretty well. I could be like, you gotta be here next Sunday. We're gonna do this thing. It's gonna change your life. Don't miss it. Don't make it. You're like, okay, I better come. And then we're just gonna try to put on a show, right? I'm not against the reason for this, but I want to explain something that I have in mind. And if I explain it to you, it'll help you understand it. You have two things we're gonna call the trellis and the vine, okay? So the vine is the vine, okay? And the trellis is what the vine grows on. Does that make sense? So when you see like a house, you have trellis and it makes the vine grow. One of the things you have to understand is the church, the life, the thing that is the body of Christ, the thing that is alive is the vine. It's you. The church, my job as a pastor and the other pastors, when we meet as a quote unquote staff, our job is trellis. We build trellis. Trellis helps the vine grow in a certain way. Does that make sense? But the mistake we make is that if I want to validate my own existence, I'm going to build a lot of trellis. I'm going to build so much trellis. In fact, how do I know I'm doing a good job? Look at the palace of trellis I've built, right? But if you have lots of trellis, it doesn't mean you have vine. You come to like really dramatic trellis everywhere with just like dead vine, right? I mean, you can have dead vine and lots of trellis, right? So talk to people that know trees and plants, and I'll tell you, like, so if you have too much trellis, it can choke out the vine, right? So the idea of trellis is that it helps the vine go in a certain direction, and you only want to put as much as you need it to go in the direction you want it to go. So the mistake we make is, let's say you guys are getting together, and you gals are all going to get together and have a women's thing where you get together. That is vine. That is life, right? We like that. You're going to get together. There's people doing ministry. It's awesome. It's life, right? We all see that until we do it. And the mistake is that, well, why doesn't the church do it? And when they say the church, they often mean the institution. Why don't we institutionalize X, Y, or Z? Tonight we're having singles night. Are you unmarried? Come to singles night. And we're like, someone comes to our church, well, what do you have? I'm like, look at our catalog. We got singles night for the singles people. We're like, okay. And we got the thing happening. That's all trellis. And you say, well, when the people come, that's vine, right? We're like, yeah, but eventually they don't go do it on their own. In other words, one of the challenges is we mistake these two things. When we see life happening in the church, that's the vine. We only want to put trellis enough to keep it from growing out in the wrong direction, but that's it. We don't want to overly do it. And so sometimes when we think of building up in our lives, we're so used to the hype, and almost always the hype is in trellis. It's in the structures. It's in the programs. It's in the things that are advertised that are going forward, but it's the unprogrammed things. The vine, the life of the church, a lot of the discipleship that happens in your life is in the car, driving somewhere. It's breaking down in the car and talking to that person and then going forward. Like, that's the vine, right? That's what happens. And so we often are looking, the people that build trellis are the people hyping stuff up in every category. The people that are in front of you speaking are almost all trellis builders. And so we've substituted the life of the church for trellis. That's kind of what I'm getting at. And the trellis always looks extraordinary and grand and wonderful, but vines are kind of dirty and like organic, and they don't always go the way you think they're going to go, and they might be wild, and they might be this. That's the picture here. So sometimes when we think of that, we tend to want to look for more extraordinary things. This book pulls us back to the ordinary, and that's kind of the point of it. So tonight, this last chapter we're going to do is all about sort of putting our faith in action, and so he calls it Stop Dreaming and Love Your Neighbor. So let's kind of go into it. He goes, in the commencement address in 1987, comedian and educator Bill Cosby took aim at the usual hype that's become the staple of such events. He says, you're not going to change the world, so don't try. The best thing you can do is to live each day with integrity and responsibility, he advised, as laughter turned to nervous chuckles and shifting in the seats. Stop being narcissistic about your dream, getting everyone else to fit into it, Cosby told Temple University grads in 2012. You've got plenty of time, but don't dream through it. Wake up. In other words, we're so chasing these things that aren't real that we forget that in the midst of like when you're on vacation or when you're waiting for something to happen, like right now while we're in boxes, right? This life is still happening. God's still it doesn't start when this next thing starts, you know? And so that's kind of it is with our dream. When I get there, then I'll start. For so many of you, you're in the military. And it's so hard to be plugged in the church when you're in the military because you're like, I've got 2 years. I don't want to really get to know people. Then I got to leave again. And I always just say like, who cares? Get fully plugged in. Like get all the way plugged in and then leave and break our hearts. But it's okay. We love you. And then we'll just have a bunch of broken hearts all over. And it's okay. That's the real, right? Because we like, well, once I settle down, then I'll like get to know people. And I'm like, well, you might not even like the people you settle down with. You get to know people as you go. Like that's real. Real life is right now. You're not guaranteed tomorrow in that way. He goes, from childhood, we're told that we can be anything we want to be, do anything we want to do, make of ourselves whatever we dream. We often miss the trees for the forest, looking for ambitious causes instead of actual people God has sent into our lives that moment, hour, day, or year. So meant to inspire us, the constant message actually paralyzes us with anxiety. What do we mean? This chapter focuses on the importance of staying at our posts, which God has called us, as children, parents, extended family, neighbors, coworkers, and citizens. Well, notice we said the chapter is focused on the importance of staying at our posts. I just talked about on Sunday. The Bible's full of these things called table lists. And essentially, it's just a list of the people that would be at the table. The husbands and the wives and the children and the parents and maybe the coworkers and the employees, employers, that all those people would be at the list. And the application of all these dramatic things is how people live in these very ordinary relationships. And we hear that, but I've never seen the Apostle Paul, and it was so weird to me. If you actually stop and think about this for a second, I want to be careful. I'm not saying you can't dream big dreams. I'm not saying that Zig Ziglar is Satan, okay? Zig Ziglar is great. He inspires you. If you know who that is, great. He's like a really inspiring guy. I'm not saying that if you're a life coach, but technically if we have life groups, does not mean that we have life coaches too. But anyways, I'm not saying if you're a life coach telling people to like find their dream board or whatever, that you're wicked, okay? But I think one of the challenges is with all of this is that in this kind of, this picture, there's nothing that the Apostle Paul ever writes where he says, look, I'm going to pour myself out and then you're going to go, and then he says, and what you need to do is go big. God wants to prepare you. He doesn't say that. He says, aspire to live a quiet life, right? He says, husbands, love your wives. Wives, love your husbands. Children, obey your parents. He doesn't, at the end of his applications, he's never like, that's why you all need to go to Africa, right? Nothing wrong with Africa. But like the whole point is not what we typically think of, right? The whole point is to tell us that when you have kids, raise them up in the Lord. And when you're a spouse, like put your family first. When you're, with your friends, and you kind of go through each stage. At one point, Paul says in 1 Corinthians is stay in the calling, like basically bloom where you're planted. This doesn't get rid of the idea that you can have dreams and pursue them, but we just sort of forget like God exists. He's in the equation. He actually knows and cares about you. And so you can actually do ministry where you are. We're not, going forward. So he says, stop looking for extraordinary callings to give meaning to our lives, which often encourages us to think of others as tools in our self-crafting. It's not the needy who need us, but particular people, many of whom we come across every day. Our neighbor is right in front of us. I love this. It's not the needy who need us. What does that mean? Like, think about our politics and the things we talk about. We love voting for other people's money to be given away. But like, people say, hey, what are the needs in the church? And I always tell people to go to small groups. Go to the life group. What are the needs? What kind of needs do we have? Go to the life group. What do you mean? Like, you'll see them. You'll see the needs. If you go to a life group and you're with people and you don't see needs, you're not looking. Sometimes the need is to listen to the person that repeats themselves all the time. And they want to be heard. Sometimes the need is to be there to give hope. Like, you're like, does that matter? Like, to the person, it certainly does. Sometimes the need is to confront. Sometimes the need is to love. Sometimes the need is to be around. But there's like needs all the time. Sometimes the need is they need some money. They need some support. They need some prayer. They need this. You could find that everywhere. And I'm not saying there's not needy people out there, but literally right in front of you, it's all around you. Like, it's not hard to find that. And that's kind of what he's saying. What if we actually looked? He goes, our neighbor, so to speak, is right in front of us. This next section is called You Go Girl, like Slake's Queen, right? He goes, the intensity of the prepping for adult success, especially by boomer and buster parents, has caused a lot of stress for boys, okay? But girls may be actually the larger casualty. What do I mean by that? He goes, we're ambivalent about the role of women in the home, in the church, and in society. Now, this tension gets transferred to children, especially girls. I have 4 girls. I understand this. On the one hand, they're expected to be preparing for the Proverbs 31 wifehood, motherhood, right? Make sure you're preparing to be this. That's pressure enough if we said, hey, make sure you're a Proverbs 31 woman. How's that going, ladies? And If I ever want to make you feel guilty, I'm like, oh, well, let's just look at this woman over here, right? Like this, how's it going? That's pressure enough. But on the other hand, they're also encouraged on many hands to be everything a boy can be. Well, a boy can do 15 pull-ups. How are yours going, right? To do everything boys can do. Schizophrenic ourselves on these questions, we may even place both these contradictory and unlivable expectations on our girls. So what do we mean by this? Trying to live up to their own dreams and those that society and parents have placed on them, many young women are putting off marriage, and especially children. In many cases, these come along at just the wrong time, when young professional women are in full swing with their career. The women who get squeezed out as slackers are those who decide at the outset that they want to be a wife and mother. Now, before we go on, let me explain this. None of this is criticizing women. Like if you are a woman and you have chosen to not be a mother, you're not in sin. The Bible doesn't say you're in sin. We do not want to go further than Scripture goes. However, I just want to explain to you that the world you're in will not give you the rewards that you think you might always get. What the world is telling you is to sacrifice your family and those dreams so that you can get the promotion, so that you can become a partner, so you can become a partner in that firm, so you can get to that promotion. That's what the world says. And I get it. Again, that's true. You might get those things. But when you're dying on your deathbed, you're not going to be stoked that you became a partner in McKinsey. You're going to be stoked that you have people drawing pictures for you, holding your hands, and are being there. Like no one cares about that. And that's just in a secular world. What about when it comes to like the task of making and raising up disciples? Do you think you're making a bigger impact on the world by getting the promotion or by like reading the story to the kids? Now if you don't have kids, maybe it's other things. But the idea though that these things are in that hierarchy, the challenge is we go one direction, and then right as you're at the peak of whatever career aspirations you have is usually if you're going to put it off, you put it off, and all of a sudden it's time. And you say, okay, I'm going to have kids now, or I'm going to try. That's usually right when you put it off to the point where you're about to get the mega promotion. And so think about what we're left with in that moment. Children really do become a burden at that point to you. That's a challenging thing. Now, that's not me making it. That's the societal position we're in. He goes on, he says, what about the women that just, they want to be mothers? My wife got a degree from the most God-hating university in America right now, Columbia University. She went to the Ivy Leagues, and she went to Columbia University. At the time, it was a God-hating university, but not like it is now. Back then, right after we got married, that's when they had Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, come out and speak. So they've always been a God-hating university, but my beautiful wife was there, and all of her roommates got like 1600s on the SATs. They were smart kids. My wife is also extremely smart. She's also extremely tall and got recruited because of basketball. So here she is at this Ivy League university. When we were getting engaged, she was taking the LSATs to be a lawyer. And we giggle about it because I think she had a bad LSAT, and that was the night that I told her I loved her. And so we were dating, so I tell her I love her on the night she got the LSAT, so we got engaged like a few months later. And so in a very real sense, God had put before her like two choices, and she did work for a few years while I was finishing up my sort of Olympic aspirations that were not happening. And so that was something that she used to tease me because all of a sudden she's making the money and supporting us for a bit. And she's like, I just feel like I'm working and I have to spend it all on you. And I'm like, yes, but it's only for a short period of time. And then for the rest of our lives, I've been supporting her. My wife's amazing. She's awesome. She's a hard worker, and she could be a millionaire if she wanted to. Truly, she's very good at anything she sets her mind to do. She's really, really good. And we have that degree from Columbia in the garage somewhere in a box, I think. And we paid for what was left on the loans to that place for some years. Her parents had helped her out a lot, but we paid for those loans. And she's a homeschool mother. And so she actually started the church in many ways because we didn't have like all the mentors we know how. So we started on Google. And so she did all the paperwork. She figured out, she worked for a grant company. She's really smart. She did it. So you're here because my wife does it. That's neat. Well, she's a stay-at-home mom. And she's great. And you're like, oh, you went to Columbia, spent all this money to be a stay-at-home mom? I'm like, yep. She got her MRS, right? She's like and I ended up getting my MRS. That's weird. How dare you misgender me? Which is actually a degree called the Masters of Religious Studies is one of the things. But the point being is simply that choice to go towards motherhood was a very conscious one. And she wasn't ashamed of it, and everyone makes different ones, but when you choose to do that, she didn't have to go to Columbia. You say, what a waste. So my oldest daughter, Kaylee, has not finished college yet. She's doing her associates, getting the first couple of years, and she may or may not do it, but she just got married to an awesome young man named Derek, and both of them, he worked for years and saved up money, and they're going on the mission field, and they're both finishing school and doing more schooling now. But again, her desire to be a mom and a wife, I think those are noble desires. I think they're great. The challenge is, well, what happens, like, what do you do next? Like, how do you, so you're kind of forced. You're like, there are no princes. Go be on your own. And it's like, well, maybe there are. And you're like, They have to brace themselves for the response at high school or college reunions when they say that they're a stay-at-home mom, right? Seriously, though, the former roommate's friend's face reads, even if the words don't come out, don't you have a job? And this is what they often hear from fellow believers. I mean, at some point, that feeling on pressure on both sides. Now, listen to what the author says. I love this. He says, I want to be careful here. I'm not one of those guys who wants his daughter to live in a prairie making her own butter. There's a new thing called trad wives. Have you heard of this before? Trad wives? Who's heard of trad wives before? Raise your hands up. Look at you guys. You're so cultural. That's so funny. So trad wives are basically trad, short for traditional, and it's a movement of people that it's a response to the total gender anarchy in our society. And trad wives are saying, I'm going to be a traditional wife. And the whole thing is LARPing. Do you know what LARPing is? LARPing is live. That's the second time I've taught and I mentioned LARPing, but it's in my mind, I guess. Live action role playing is like the nerdiest thing you can do. And if you do it, I'm not against you. I think you're awesome, but you have to admit you're a nerd, and you would admit it if you're LARPing. LARPers, to put in perspective, if you come out, I remember when I was a trainer once at the gym, I went downstairs into the gymnasium to go, and I was walking through the gymnasium, and there's these guys dressed with like wizard cowls running, and another person running, and he was throwing beanbags, which represented spells at someone else, and someone else had like this foam sword, and he was running through, and I just sat down. I literally missed my client. I had to go, I like missed hundreds of dollars because I couldn't leave what I was watching. And I was so close to asking to join. I was like, but I couldn't cross the threshold. That's LARPing. Well, trad wife is LARPing. What do I mean? What's traditional about wives and husbands? People say, well, that's how society was made. Like, everyone wants to get just up to the point where they wanted to say, God designed us, and he made men and women. They fit together, and they do different things. They complement one another. That's kind of the normal thing. That's the normal position. To have the trad wife thing without God's design and telos to things is just sort of a random, sort of arbitrary decision to like play act this role. And so it's a caricature of what we would call traditional wife. You could be a traditional wife and have a career and be super wealthy. Like the Proverbs 31 woman had a job and she had her own business, it looks like, right? So you can have your own business, and it doesn't have to be selling essential oils. You can have your own business that's actually doing things that are like, nothing wrong with essential oils if you sell those. Right? But you can have your own business even, right? So but trad wives are like a caricature of it, where you dress extra traditional, and it's like you're play acting, right? And so, but you could see people doing that. And his whole point is that I'm not trying to create trad wives, okay? Especially since World War II, women are great. Okay, awesome. It was unlike previous eras, churches assume far less of a burden for their young aspirants to the holy office, so they're hardly in a position to make these dedicated spouses feel more guilty for picking up the slack. Listen to what he means right here. When we started the church, one of the biggest challenges I had was, if we're going to teach any sort of picture of a traditional role in marriage, how can we hire pastors and then expect their wives to foot the bill because they worked? And that's our conviction. Now, can the wife work? Yes. Is our goal to be able to pay pastors enough so they can support their family? Yes. Do we do that well? No. Are we trying? Yes. Are we close? So usually everyone's got like a side gig, but we don't want that. We want them to build, that's the goal, right? We want the wives to not have to work. And so how could we say that this is something we value if we don't put our money where, that's the goal, right? And so he's like, how can churches sit up and say, women, you shouldn't work, and meanwhile the husband's being supported as a pastor because the wife is making the money? Again, women do have callings outside the home, and they're not only wives and mothers, but also friends, neighbors, cultivating culture at the most local level in countless ways. Many also have additional callings for which they've been educated and trained. And like their male counterparts, they have student debt and expectations of making good use of their education. Avoiding legalism and antinomianism, lawlessness, we need wisdom. Why do we say that? Because each case will differ from others. It is for single women and couples themselves to decide what is best in their case, drawing on biblical principles and the specifics of their own situation. So listen, there are people, even in this church, that will tell you that women, if you work outside the home, you're somehow in sin. Let me remind you that those people are going beyond what the Bible says. Let me know about it, and I'll speak to them. The Bible does not say you're in sin. And to call something a sin when it's not is egregious. You're going beyond what God says. Do you think God forgot to say what he wanted to say? Be careful. When the Bible's specific, we're specific. When the Bible's vague, we should be vague. When the Bible's ambiguous, we should remain ambiguous. We shouldn't go beyond what God said. That's what Pharisees showed us the mistakes in that. So is it possible for you to be married where the woman has a job and maybe she even makes more money than the man? The Bible doesn't say you can't do that, but it does say that the husband is still the head of the home. Is it harder for the husband to be the head of the home, practically speaking, when the wife is supporting him? Like if you come home and he's playing video games with cheaters, and you're like married to Beavis and Butthead, and you're like this high-powered woman, and you come home, he's like, you think like, okay, yes, practically speaking, and women, as you know, as you become more high-powered and you have a high-paying job and you got a high-paying education, does it mean that the amount of men that you might find yourself up for maybe I'll consider that guy? Does it limit the amount of guys possible? Yes. Does our society make it harder and harder for you to find men in many respects? Well, yes. College is largely moving more and more towards women, so men are getting less college education. And so you've got this scenario where we're creating a lot of, so what's the college's answer is you don't need people, be ambiguous and just, whatever. So, but the point we're trying to make is when we talk about gender roles, you can talk about design without making things sin. I just think and then you can talk about things that are wise without making everything a sin. That's all I'm saying. Because what I do want to challenge, though, is the particular stress of being superwoman. Because I've already addressed the more cross-gender issues of ambition and restless. These characteristics pressure everyone. Let's just talk about men for a second. Men, if you grew up at all in the 90s, all of the normal male actors was Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone. They were the normal guy. That's the hero. And if you notice, Arnold Schwarzenegger is Mr. Universe. Women say, we women have such unrealistic body standards. Not anymore, Dove commercials, but men, unrealistic body standards. You mean our normal heroes are all Arnold Schwarzenegger? The guy that was considered the most fit guy in the world at the time, like he's going to be the normal guy that just decides to go. Like, okay, so guys have dealt with these types of things. Men are made to look bad in every movie. In every movie, the father has a business meeting and the son has a baseball game. And the most heroic thing is when the father's like, "You're right, I'll quit my job to go see the game, Timmy." And they're like, "Yay! Don't worry, we don't have money anymore, but that's okay." It's always a dad working on Christmas. So then every dad that has a meeting and every softball league or whatever league that happens with whether it's soccer, volleyball, tennis, whatever, your kid's game, they're scheduling it. They don't care about your CEO job that supports your family. So now you're left to feel like a terrible person, and then every single movie makes you feel terrible because of quality time. Like we see that. So he says, for example, in reaction against this danger, many parents are expected to focus on the family, but with extraordinary expectations. Often fathers are stressed out as they try to balance foreign and domestic vocations. They have to be warlords, raising Daniels and Deborahs in the Lord's army. However much of this expectation falls especially on mothers, now the family can become an idol, even if you work full-time at home. So it's not enough to be a stay-at-home mom. Even if you homeschool, you're like, well, do you have like a bento box for your kids? Did you make their sandwich into star shapes? Like, what in the world? So in addition to being a cab driver, shuttling the kids between various activities, mom has to be a pastor, teacher, expert on everything, volunteer, social worker, and chef. Oh, by the way, and the church needs you to show up at every single night. In a high-risk world, it's up to super mom. Conservatives and progressives have different ways of substituting ambitions of greatness for attentiveness to the ordinary. What he's saying is, don't miss this, in the same way that I just talked about the career, and I'll say that's largely, we said, is a liberal sort of view that tends to de-emphasize the telos of God's design. We tend to say, well, women in careers, we tend to avoid traditional roles. On conservative circles, we tend to overemphasize the extraordinary nature of those roles, and so we make it so that you always feel like you're failing. You always, if you don't show up at everything, you're failing. If your kids don't go to bed when they go, or your kids don't read, oh my goodness, wait till you have kids that read. Joey Bag of Donuts' kid over here, they just read like War and Peace by the age of 4. And your kid's like smearing poop on the glass, and you're like, oh my gosh, I failed. It's going to happen to you, right? One person, you're going to go somewhere and you have the mom has a snack for the kid. And you're a stay-at-home mom, this is what you do. And so their snack is like so nice. And again, those bento box snacks, they're crazy. And they have all the things, there's nutrition. And they're like, the juice is like organic. And what do you have in there? Like a Pepsi and a Lunchable. And why do you have that? Because you were busy. It doesn't mean, or maybe you were tired. You're allowed to be tired like that. And so all the things that you read, like, right? So we see this. Nowhere is the ordinary more important to culture and yes, less valuable in our society than in relation to motherhood. I'm not saying anything pro or con here about women working outside the home. I'm only suggesting that the burdens we place on women, even from childhood, make them anxious about life and drive them to expect dissatisfaction with the normal and everyday aspects of life that are so crucial for the development of deep roots, wisdom, and nurture for the whole family. Look at this again. the burdens we place on women, even in the church, from childhood, make them anxious. The one thing, if I said, I'm going to have a women's class right now, you know what my first subject would be? Worry. That's so sexist. Oh, it's not sexist. All the people tell you that, I'm worried. Is that how women are all the time? Are women just worriers? Or do you think we've created a scenario where it's really hard for women not to worry because it's constant problems? And it's not just having to worry about kids, worry about, what about my career? What if I didn't aspire to my dreams yet? What if I don't do this? I mean, think about the challenge we have, right? If you see someone get married young, you're like, oh, that's so young. When's the right age to get married? Well, what if it's, oh, now I'm getting older, it's too late. Why can't you get married at 50? At 80? Ugh. Did I fail? No. There's no winning, is my point. The things that mothers do and why people wouldn't do it, but mothers in particular, isn't even measurable, much less stupendously satisfying on a daily basis. What'd you do? I didn't scream at my kid today as much as I did yesterday. Much of it can be tedious, repetitive, and devoid of the intellectual stimulation found in adult company. So the husband goes off and he's like moving and shaking and talking about widgets and stuff. And then here's my wife coming in right now. Yay. Late, super late. Look, I'm teaching, and so she knows I'm teaching, and she came in 35 minutes late. What kind of superwoman? I'm just kidding, honey. Look at that. But she made it with 5 kids. Like, one is out. So 4 kids now. And they have pants on. Okay. 2 kids with no shoes on. So she came in super late, but she came. Right? That's a big one. Sometimes if you see at church, sometimes you'll see the moms with strollers and you can tell they're not paying attention to what they're saying. They're outside and they're trying and the kids are saying, and like they're trying and then they feel guilty. I just want to do my devotion. I'm like, stop feeling guilty. Stop feeling like God puts us in seasons. God knows that you don't get a lot of sleep in those times. Like that's okay. It's the same. I mean, like there's things that happen, right? Much of the tedious stuff they have, it's in a myriad of ways, the daily calling of dying to self is felt more acutely than anyone by mothers. Again, I'm going off and I'm talking about big things. Scott and I are talking about, how do you think this meshes with this thing? And what do you think about the specs in the inline for the rotary girl? And I get home and your wife was sitting there talking about whether Cocomelon is appropriate with Cocomelon Lane, because Cocomelon Lane is gay Cocomelon, and then Cocomelon's a real Cocomelon, so you have Cocomelon Lane, just so you know. If you want to show your kids Cocomelon, that's the good one. If you want to watch Cocomelon Lane, that's the liberal Cocomelon. That's how you know. That was the conversations. What they need is fewer guilt trips and expectations and more encouragement as they invest in ordinary tasks that yield long-term dividends. Look, yes, there's times to come at people because they make excuses or they're lazy. I'm not saying that, but the guilt trip is normal because most people feel guilty themselves. In other vocations, we often follow best practices. Well, where do we find the perfect mother? Of successes that can be evident to us and others, yet there's no promotion in motherhood. We're not like, you're a black belt mom. Our 5th child is as confusing as our first. So maybe we're just bad at it, that's okay. We're probably, like most people, I've learned that we don't have bedtimes for our kids. Often our kids ask to go to bed. We're like nightclub owners. Does that make us bad parents? Maybe. But people are like, oh, I get what you're doing. What is that? What are we doing? We started the church. We had all those people staying over super late, so we just had ministry super late. That's how our kids grew up. That's how it is. We have people working on the house because it was flooded, right? So there's like these guys working on the house right now while we're living there. They're working on it. And so Lucille, my youngest daughter, is 5, and so she was on the couch because the room wasn't done. And so she somehow gets naked in the middle of the night, and she sleeps on the floor in the fetal position with her butt in the air, just in the middle of the floor. It's a hardwood floor. That's how she was sleeping. And these wonderful guys are coming in to work on the house. Well, all of us are asleep, just stepping over her to go work, and she slept for another hour and a half like that. Does that seem like we're good parents? They could have been like there to rob us, and we're like, whatever, she's fine right there in the middle of the floor. Like, just go and step over her when you go to the office. Like, that's us. So, mothers stand at the core of that gift exchange as it radiates into ever wider concentric circles from the home to the neighborhood and the church to society at large. Precisely because they're gifts and not commodities, domestic labors sustain communities that cannot be measured or valued in the marketplace, and that's their strength, not their weakness. Everything I've said about motherhood has obvious applications to fathers as well, right? So we talked about this. Ambition encourages us, fathers, to make 2 mistakes. First, we become consumed with our work. Second, we try to make up for it by quality time, which is what? Money spent on family vacations. In other words, it's super, like when I get home tonight, my children will still be awake, but there's some of them are here will talk. And when they go to want to talk to me, sometimes I don't have energy. And so I'm like, I need to have energy and be present. And so I'll have energy to talk and hear the story and stuff. But you know what's easier to do? Say, whatever, I'm going to go watch TV, and then I just plan a trip, right? And so we think, oh, well, that's good. We need to take the pressure off both parents. Let them take a breath. And resting in God's grace, let them revel in the ordinary chat in the car, the normal conversation over family devotions, and the countless moments that add up. Did you know that so some families, like Pastor Trace helps families do family devotions. We haven't ever had a family devotion in our house. Now, I'm not saying that that's good or bad, but we talk a lot about theology. One of my daughter's classes, she's taking college classes right now, and her teacher is an activist liberal. And I despise everything out of his mouth. And we've learned to have fun with it. So now Sophia goes to class, and everything he says, she just looks up the opposite. And I'm like, it's become a great education because it's like very accurate. I'm like, he's so accurately wrong every single time. Just let's look up the opposite. She's like, oh my goodness. You know, so that's been fun, you know, but you do learn through all that. But it's not like we sit down and like, okay, kids, let's sing. Now, some people do, and I commend you for it, but we've never done, okay, kids, let's all sing a hymn, right? Again, I wish my kids were always singing God songs, but often all my kids will be like, it's getting hot in here. I'm like, no, that's not the song, right? But my point is, we often think such events and things are spontaneous, and a certain extent they are, but really the things that bubble up when people are living ordinary lives together is where like actual discipleship is. How much time do you think Jesus spent walking from place to place with the disciples? Do you think it was always like, okay, children, sit down, it's lesson time? Or do you think they're like, let's walk this 30 miles together? You tend to probably talk about stuff, right? Because I've already quoted the first answer of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. He says, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. It's sometimes easier for us to glorify God, or try to, than to enjoy him. And again, I don't want to make you feel guilty. Goal. But even when the best motives and intentions, we can become so busy seeking to bring praise to God through what we do for him that we don't delight in him for who he is and for what he's given us. I've said this a lot, so this shouldn't be new to you, but the same goes for our neighbor. So so notice what he just said. What is the greatest commandment in the scripture? Jesus says, is to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Right? And really, what would that mean? Like, why is murder considered wrong and bad? It's because this person is an image bearer of God, and you just murdered that image bearer. That's why when you slander another person that's made in the image of God, you're slandering an image bearer. That's why we value people, whether they're Christians or not. They bear the image of God. That's what gives us value. We say that. It's not just arbitrary. It's not intrinsic in that sense. It's that they actually they wear that image. It's what makes sin sinful, but it also gives people value. And so in saying that they bear the image of God, and we start to think of that, then we say, okay, I'm going to love God, and then I'm going to love the people made in his image that are nearest to me. That's kind of the basic intention here, right? But when I say love them, if I'm going to enjoy God and that love for him, I'm going to serve in that way, then I'm also going to enjoy the people around me. Now, it's true uniquely in the church, right? But just in general, people in general, even the worst, quote unquote, people that you can meet are people made in God's image, and they're interesting. People are very interesting. If you stop thinking of people as enemies, remember, you never minister to enemies. There's no such thing. They might be enemies of the church, but not to you. The only reason they're enemies, you would be joining them if it weren't for the grace of God. We're ambassadors of grace. And so even if there are enemies, even if they're the worst person, even if you're mocking their beliefs, and don't get me wrong, there's time for sharp speech, okay? But even in those moments, there's an expectation that this person is made in God's image, that there's an interesting aspect to them. It's one of the reasons why when you talk to cults, it's so dehumanizing, because you know that to them, you're just a notch. That's why they're in a speech, they get into a rhythm and they start getting on their script, and they don't care who you are. The things you want to have a conversation like, right, and as I was going, they go back to their script. And so that kind of thing, it doesn't make you feel like a real person. The same goes for neighbors. We can be so caught up in doing things for our neighbors that we use them as service projects. In other words, their needs and even their misfortunes provide an opportunity for us to tweak our self-image and grow as a person. I said this before, but if you want to go serve at a soup kitchen on Thanksgiving and there's a waiting list, you can't do it. I'm not even joking. You want to serve on Thanksgiving, you better sign up early. Right? Because before you go give thanks, you want to show that, you want to go serve. And is it nice to serve? Absolutely. But I guarantee you go serve a soup kitchen right now, there's no wait. There's not even a waiting list. You can just go do it. But Thanksgiving there is. Why? I'm not criticizing. I mean, I kind of am, but I'm like, what's the goal? Who are we serving in this? I feel a lot better about myself. I can go enjoy my food now because I served other people. And this is kind of the idea. That gives me an opportunity. These aren't wrong, though, to do it in themselves, but as byproducts, there's a danger of turning other people into instruments for our own selfish ends. Do you enjoy your neighbor? I don't mean the people living next to you. Maybe I do. I don't really talk to those people. But do you enjoy the people you're around? Like, if you're, check this out. If you're at Vaughn's and you talk to that person, try to enjoy them. What? Like, just try it. And watch how often the gospel is more easy to talk about. Just enjoy those people. Like, if you're interested in people, it just works, right? It's a lot easier to serve them than to enjoy him or her. Right? Food, next in line. Here's if you're like, it's easier to do than like, well, what's going on? It's a lot easier to see me and my service as a gift to someone less fortunate without seeing a needy person as a gift to me. In addition, it's a lot easier to enjoy the neighbor I'll serve in the soup line with whom I'll probably not see again, at least for more than 5 or 10 minutes at a time, than the one who actually lives next door or who wakes me up after midnight with wild parties or who I see at the DMV or who I see. Like, my entire ministry strategy has been going to the same places all the time, and I end up seeing people and we talk to them, and they a lot of times come to the church. It's easier to pour myself into service projects for the needy than it is to give a little more to my wife and kids. Wait a second. That's ordinary. I can't see the impact of the dozen or so little conversations, corrections, laughs, and tasks that happen in a day, or even a week, month, perhaps even a year. I can't measure the ordinary stuff, but I can measure, supposedly, how many souls were saved or how many people were fed or how much money came in for a special project. Let me give you an example. A very prominent church in San Diego made a big statement about how many service hours they've given to the city of San Diego. And what they did is everyone went out and served, whatever it was. Oh, we picked up trash on the beach. We did this. And they calculated it all. And they told the city of San Diego, we've given you 27,000 hours of community service. Okay? And they say, that's what we've given you, right? So we've given that to you. So what are they? This is now they're leveraging that. So for what? Give us advantage. We just want you to know how great we are. And then we go back. Like, look, that's trellis. That's not life. I mean, it's what happens here. The vine that happens here is fine, but the trellis you're building to like enfranchise it to make this the thing, that's the trellis. There's no life in it. It gives the notch in the belt for the pastor saying it makes you feel good about it, but that's not the ministry. That's not where the life is. The life is the one person that's actually affected. That's a real person, a human being, not a number that was affected. And you don't even always get to see the result of it. You know, you don't always get to see the results of it. I mentioned this story just recently, so I'll say it again, and some of you heard of it, I just love it. One time, a long time ago, years and years ago, long story short, there was a scenario at our house where some guy stole a bicycle. And this was back when we had the FBI and all these people that knew our house because we had that guy whose dad was the founder of Hamas. Long story, but just Google it. Someone was stealing a bicycle. My wife says, don't steal that bicycle. And so a bunch of us that were at our house, because it was a Tuesday night or whatever, ran out after the person, like 3 a.m. And my wife's mom decides to call the police to report a bike theft. And since our number was a special address, they must have known who we were. Literally within minutes, there was a helicopter and multiple cop cars at our house, like immediately. And everyone's like, wow, they really care about bike thefts in PB, right? And this poor kid who had stolen the bike is hiding somewhere when the cars show up and the helicopter, the spotlights come out. This is a pretty interesting moment. It was a very interesting night. And so one of the cops, I was in the car and I just jumped in the car, we're talking, I said, how's your night? And he told me about his night, he was having a bad night and his wife had just left him and he was pretty dejected, feeling terrible, and I ministered to him with the gospel. I shared the gospel with him. I told him about Jesus. I gave him my card and told him to look up the sermons and whatnot, and I just prayed with him. And then I left. And you fast forward 5-6 years later, Scott's wife, Libby, this is before they were married, was driving somewhere and her car got a flat tire. And as she was driving, a police officer pulled up and decided to give her a ride to where she was going. And she said, oh, I'm going to the church or wherever she said. And she told him in some way that she was going to church. She goes, I know your pastor. He ministered to me one night and I gave my life to Christ. Tell him I said hi. Now, here's the thing. That's what heaven's going to be like. You're going to find all the connections. I saw you praying in a restaurant one night and I was having the worst night of my life. I was wondering if God would give me a sign. I looked over, I see you pray with your kids. You're not even going to know. And you're going to find out. Like, imagine the reunion. We're like, wait, that happened here, and you had to, like, you're just like, wow, that's Vine. But what do we want to celebrate? We did 27,000 hours of community service. Like, Like, give me that's trellis. You don't get to, we're not on the other side. We're not on the celebration side. We're not at the bema seat. We're not at the reward time. It's the vine, it's the life. We just trust God's good and he's always working. And so the brothers that sold Joseph into slavery didn't know what it was going to turn out. They didn't know what was going to happen. Like, we look at it in hindsight, we're like, isn't that neat? But the vine that's happening in the moment isn't what we think about, right? He's like, when we think about how we come in for these things, that we got to remember. He goes, a fellow used to pass a massive construction site on his way to work. One day he stopped and asked people what they were doing, and one worker answered, I'm hauling dirt. Another said, I'm cutting stones. And standing up straight, a third man said cheerfully, I'm building a cathedral. The goal was extraordinary, and it was this that motivated what seemed on the surface to be nothing more than dull routine. What'd you do today? I put up with a bunch of bratty kids. What do you do today? I'm building the future of this nation and the church. Oh, I'm passing on the legacy of faith to people that will carry this gospel to the unreached. Oh, what are you doing? I'm creating the next missionaries, the next mothers and fathers. What are you doing? I'm pushing the gospel forward. Whoa. Instead of I changed diapers and watched Cocomelon, I had to watch out for Cocomelon Lane. You don't need to be Michelangelo to take delight in helping to build the scaffold that he used to paint the Sistine Chapel. Right? Not only in the ministry, but in all vocations, some plant, some water, but the Lord gives the increase. The Old Testament law provided for two distinct types of sacrifice, right? Thanksgiving and guilt. Well, the good news is God provides a sacrifice for guilt, and so now we offer a sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving. In other words, we live lives of gratitude. What do I mean by that? So often we think about our service in the church. If you do it unto God, you're missing it. Christ already did everything unto God. Now you do it unto your neighbor in the name of God. Right? What do I mean by that? Because we live in a grace economy, not a debt economy. Christ finished the work. That's why when you wonder if Christ is going to be pleased with you, you're wrong. You're missing it. How dare you put your work above Christ's? Right? At least we're free to be thankful to offer ourselves as living sacrifices, right? We're on the receiving end of everything. This is the Christian life. We're not building a kingdom, but receiving a kingdom. We're not appeasing God, but receiving his gift of righteousness in his Son. And as recipients of this covenantal exchange between the Father and the incarnate Son, the church lives in an economy of gratitude rather than either sacrifice or as an extension of Christ's atoning work. In other words, we are passive receivers of the gift of salvation, but we are thereby rendered active worshipers in a life of thanksgiving that's exhibited chiefly in loving service to our neighbors. Let me say this again. We receive salvation, and so we don't need to get it. So then in our delight going forward, it ministers to others. I mean, that's what's going on. Especially when we gather for corporate worship, we are reminded again that beneath all the contracts we've conducted throughout the week, reality is fundamentally ordered by God's covenantal faithfulness. In other words, God speaks and we respond with thanksgiving. And here the logic of the market is disrupted by the doxological logic of grace. Well, another way to look at this is that in all of our lives, and here's what's interesting about what we're saying, in all of our lives, I've said this before, but I don't want you to miss this. The church, and only the church, by the way, and sometimes not even that, everywhere in life you go, every relationship is transactional. In a world without God, even your marriages are transactional. I give you to get. Everything's transactional, and every other religious view is transactional. I give God so my crops grow. I give so I get. I do so I get. I act so I get. But the Bible's relationship is not transactional, right? We call it covenantal, but we're going to use this word grace for a moment, just so you can see it. Grace is a free gift, a free unmerited. Well, how does a free unmerited gift have to do with transaction? There's no transaction to get it. So if in the church all of a sudden you're nice to the people that deserve niceness, well, you're just old school. That's why Paul said one time, I want to talk to you about your infants. You're only of the flesh because you're backbiting and arguing because it's all about advantage and what you get from the relationship. There's people in this church, by the way, in this church, some of the most famous, awesome people are around in this room. There's people here that are the top of their fields. You've got people in this room that are the best at what they do. Well, you should go talk to them. Imagine what they could do for you, right? And there's other people that are losers. I'm just kidding. No, but my point is simply, if we care about people, we aren't in the transaction. Remember, Philemon and Onesimus were together in the church, right? And like, which one would you want to be friends with? The guy that was the previous runaway slave who's back, or the guy that like had all the goods that can run? Like, that's what Paul's arguing against about being partial in the church. Like, that value, that transactional nature that's so natural for us is totally upended by grace. And so we have our sort of commodity, the thing we trade in, isn't transaction. We don't trade influence, we don't trade finances, we trade grace. You can't trade grace if you don't have it. How can you give something you don't have? I can't give freely if I don't have it. If I give and I don't have it, I need to get something back. If I don't have satisfaction in the Lord, I'm going to give to you to get a little satisfaction from you. I'm going to give you a present, and your reaction better be good, or else it wasn't worth giving it to you. Right? That's what we happen. So if I give you something, you just walk off and don't appreciate it, I feel like it wasn't worth it to give to an unappreciative person. That's not grace. I should be able to give it to you, and you slap me in the face, and it was just as worthy to give. Because I'm already free. I'm already full. I don't need anything. That is so alien to everything we know. And so when we think about going forward, listen to this. This idea we see, he goes, until people are persuaded that God is the fountain of all our good, Calvin insists that they'll never devote themselves wholly, truly, and sincerely to him. Grace inspires gratitude. There is an exact parallel in this respect between piety and faith, notes Calvin scholar Brian Garish. He says, only because of the forgiveness of sins that come from Christ can the uneasy conscience ever be assured that God is indeed good and the source of all good. In other words, if you're constantly wondering if God's mad at you or if he likes you because you did enough, you are 100% not living the Christian life. The Christian life is accepting. What does he say in 1 John? We've come to believe the love God has for us. It is receiving, accepting, and trusting in the fact that he does, taking him at his word. But I'm not worthy of love. Can we move on from elementary things and you can trust him at his word? I love you. I sent my son to die for you. Is that not enough to prove it? Meh. So from God alone, therefore, all good and perfect gifts come to the world and then are distributed by us for the feast. The church is the place where sinners are receivers. It's also the people who are scattered to fulfill their common calling. In the latter, the church has no dominion. What do I mean by that? In the world that you inhabit outside the church doesn't have dominion. I'm not your boss's boss. It cannot command the covenant community to embrace particular political ideologies, policies, parties, or politicians. It can only witness to the kingdom of grace, not inaugurate the kingdom of glory. Hence, Calvin, as well as Luther, refers to the two kingdoms that must be kept distinct in the present age, although the believer participates in both. In other words, we're not changing the world by your actions either. In other words, if I do something to achieve a change in the world, again, you just became a commodity. Do I need to alleviate homelessness to help the homeless? No. So why help the homeless if you can't help it? Because that's a person made in their image, in God's image, and I'm going to help the homeless because it's an act of gratitude and worship to God. But why don't we go and stop homelessness through that? I'm like, well, then you should just become a capitalist because capitalism's done more to alleviate homelessness than any work you're going to do. But you can go help that person made in the image of God as an act of worship. That's why Jesus says that night think about it, make sure you never sound more like Judas than Jesus. What did Judas say? My Lord, this could have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor. Look at the utilitarian nature. We could have helped the poor with this money used to just worship you. And Jesus says, you have the poor with you always, but she chose this moment to worship me. In other words, he says that to worship me and to worship the poor is the same event. We don't help the poor to stop poverty. You could, but when you go help the poor, the idea that you're helping the poor to stop poverty is not scriptural. You're helping the poor as an act of worship. Christ is going to stop poverty when he comes back. And the poverty we have comes from terrible things. You could stop poverty in those things. Those are all reasonable things you can do. But again, make sure people don't become commodities. That's all I'm trying to say. Gustav Wingren, I love the name Gustav, nicely summarized Luther's concern with the neighbor as the recipient of the believer's good works. He says, instead of living in monasteries, committing their lives in service to themselves and their own salvation, or living in castles commanding the world to mirror the kingdom of Christ, Luther argues believers should love and serve their neighbors through their vocations in the world, whether or where their neighbors need them. In other words, he says, God does not need our good works, but our neighbor does. Whew. When we offer our works to God, we are simultaneously attempt to depose Christ from his throne and neglect our neighbor, since these works have clearly been done not for our sake of our neighbor, but for prayed before God. If I go to the soup kitchen so God's pleased, not only did I not really help my neighbor like I should, I also did it to show God how great I am. And what happens, basically nothing happens good. He goes, God descends to serve humanity through our vocation. So instead of seeing good works as our works for God, they are now to be seen as God's work for our neighbor, which God performs through us. We are truly and actually truly the hands and feet of Christ. Which is why when you go out and do ministry, I don't want you to do it in the name of Barabbas Road Church. That's the whole point. This water bottle is brought to you by Barabbas Road Church. Like, what? Trellis. That's not life. That's why both orders are upset when we seek to present good works to God as if he needed them. In contrast, when we're overwhelmed by the superabundance of God's gracious gift, we express our gratitude in horizontal works of love and service to the neighbor. And so there's a bunch of awesomeness in this, but let me just give you a quote. He says, love does not think about doing works. It finds joy in people. And when something good is done for others, that does not appear to love as works, but simply as gifts which flow naturally from love. Can I say something like, if you didn't want to do the ministry, my life, there's many aspects of it that would feel very sacrificial. And that's just my life. What do I mean by that? Well, I enjoy reading about the Lord. I enjoy studying for sermons. I enjoy talking to people that have problems, and I enjoy rejoicing in people that have celebration. I enjoy people. I enjoy studying. I enjoy doing what we're doing. If I didn't do those things, if I was just trying to serve the Lord and do these, do you know the burden it would feel? It'd be like feeling like I had a giant paper due every week that I hated on a subject about like snails. That'd be a sacrifice, wouldn't it? I said it again before, the difference between torture and sports is literally your goals. If I strapped you in a chair and gave you the sensations of a marathon, you would be screaming. They say that's ungodly. How dare you? Oh, now I feel nauseous. I'm breathing heavy. I'm having a heart attack. But when you're running, you're like, it's a runner's high. This is the best. I love it. My feet are bleeding. Who cares? Let me go. I'm getting stinky. Oh, it's hard. My knees hurt. My legs hurt. I broke something. I do jujitsu. It's fun. I broke both my hands, 4 ribs, almost all my toes and fingers at various times. I broke my nose. Now, if I just went out on the street and got hit by a car, I would be like, yeah! But I go into it willingly, ha ha ha, it's just so fun, right? Because of my goals. Now, stop it for a second. If I truly love the Lord, the same stupid job changes. Honestly, how many of our jobs are honestly awesome? If you stop and think about it, my job's the best, okay. But if you stop and think about it, they are awesome. God cares about it. He used it. My favorite is back in the book of Exodus. It talks about the people that had to carry the tent pegs. And it spelled out their job. And you're like, oh, all I got to do is carry the tent pegs. I'm like, I'd rather carry the tent pegs for the Lord than to serve myself and Satan. Right? That's kind of the whole point. That God actually cared about who was carrying the tent pegs and actually ascribed who was going to carry it and how they're going to do it. That there was an important job. I love the idea that you get to camp and Mo's like, where's the tent pegs? He's like, I come forth with the tent pegs. It's the guy in the band that plays the triangle or the cymbals or the thing. You need the symbol. It's okay to be that guy. I mean, if I was in a rap band, I'd be the guy in the background yeah. They need the guy. You need the hype guy, right? You could be that in life. Maybe that's what God's going to use. Under the law, and Adam once trapped in the cycle of sin and death, okay? We know this, but it's not the law that changes in our faith, but our relation to it that makes the difference, right? We begin to delight not only in God, but in our neighbor. We're no longer modern masters or postmodern tourists or forgiven pilgrims, rather. On our way to the city of God, he is built and spreads a table in the wilderness for us on the way. So just as the gospel directs us outside of ourselves to the divine stranger who meets us in peace and reconciliation, it frees us from the extroverted piety that's no longer obsessed with either self-condemnation or self-justification. What did he say this? Well, hold on. Extroverted piety. This looks different in lots of ways. In the past, back in the Jonathan Edwards days, right? Maybe you would just take walks and you'd write crazy poetry. I mean, what did I just hear? Taylor Swift's new album is the Tortured Poet Society, and I think I heard Ben Shapiro saying, where is that society that tortures these poets and how can I join it? I thought that was pretty funny. No offense, Swifties. I'm sure it's great. But I love that he says that he talks about, what does he call it? Extroverted piety. Well, that could come in a lot of ways. It can come in the Pharisee that brings their phylacteries broad and long so they get greetings in the marketplace. It can come from the person that goes forth in their listening. It also can come from the charismatic church where the person that's the most passionate that just sits down and goes down like, okay, right? Like, I'm not saying you can't be extroverted and pietistic, but there's a sense, if you ever feel awkward, you're like, I love God and I don't feel as expressive as that, right? It enables us to concentrate not on the inward process of infused habits and our own moral progress, but to turn our attention outward to the fellow strangers all around us. The gospel makes us extrospective, turning our gaze upward to God in faith and outward to our neighbor in love. Again, it's the blessed self-forgetfulness, the blessed freedom of self-forgetfulness. Again, aren't you sick of thinking about yourself? No, I love it. I worship myself. Well, I know you do, but you shouldn't. Okay. Well, how can I stop thinking about myself? I can't. Even as I think about not thinking about myself, I'm just thinking about myself all the time. I can't. The freedom of that is literally the discipline to sing a song. Like I've said this before, but this Sunday when Scott's leading us to sing, take all. I just saw a Babylon Bee article where the guy says like, the music leader with the laser lights and the smoke machine behind is like, let's just get rid of all distractions in our mind. But truly though, being about the prayers that he's praying, being about the lyrics you're singing is really challenging. For years, when we would sing, I would sing and I'd also be praying for my preaching that's about to happen. God, help me, help me, help me. And then we're singing about the greatness of God. And lately I've just cleared all that out and I'm like, my mind is engaged in what I'm saying. You are great. And I'm saying it, and I'm like, well, I want to say more. You're great, because no. I'm just going to say the lyrics with everyone else. I'm going to be led. And I'm going to be about that. When you say amen, it means I agree with you. And that's a good thing. It's the amen and amen. And so the tyranny of that self, it's freedom from sin's guilt and the tyranny of self, and it's from that place that you can actually love people and be interested in them, where they're not a commodity. They're not a transactional thing. You cannot do it without a focus on someone more worthy than you, which is God. So the focus is on God, not your neighbor, you're God. And then from that focus on God, not yourself, your neighbor becomes way more interesting and fun, and it's much more easy to serve them because you're not stressed about what you're thinking about your own navel and it's just this and that. And finally, we're going to end with this little bit. You're all going to die. It's true. My favorite book I've ever taught here was the book Remember Death. And it's very good. It's one of my favorite books outside the Bible. Remember Death. You're all going to die. I love that subject. I love saying it. I really do. Because we're such liars. And it's such a place to remind yourself, like, literally, the guy that built the place you're sitting in is dead now. He's in glory. You're sitting like literally, this is a one-story place. The guy that built it, that we came in, literally 5 years ago, whatever, we're coming in here, he was young, and he died. He's dead. Right? It's crazy, right? You say people die, they die, and you're gonna die, and everyone's gonna die. And it's true, and it's not the message that college grads are used to hearing. And that's why that 2012 commencement speech, screenwriter Joss Whedon created so much media buzz. In our youth culture, even mature adults are encouraged to recover their inner teenager. I may be old, but I'll never grow up. I read just yesterday on a vanity plate. Peter Pan didn't want to grow up, right? That's the kind of the idea. I'm never gonna grow up. I'm young forever. Right? It's the challenge of watching, I just saw that movie Civil War, and watching Kirsten Dunst looked a lot older in that movie. And no offense to her, great, she's younger than me. And I was like, whoa. And it just made me realize, whoa. And then you realize how plastic, and I actually commend her because she's like, I'm not going to go the route of being plastic like all the other people. And I'm like, good for her. But still, it's like you no, I mean that. I don't mean that to be funny. I'm like, still, it's brave. It's awesome. Like my wife told me today, she's like, I can see all the gray in your hair. And I'm like, that's not very nice. She goes, no, it looks great. And I'm like, thanks, hon. There's no denying that it's hard to keep up with expectations. The most taboo topic in our society is death. It literally is. You don't want to make light of it, but I love reminding our kids. Our kids are so used to it now. They make jokes all the time. They're like, if you do that, you're going to die one day. We always joke because it's true. Whatever the thing you are doing is going to happen. If you go first in the house, you're going to die one day. Oh, but you're going to die one day too. Oh! But it's true. At least in California, people don't die, they just pass away. Better yet, they live on in their legacy and the memories they leave behind, but make no mistake about it, death stalks us and eventually stops us in our tracks. I say this to you about the guy that died listening because he listened to me teach about death, and he's not here. He's with glory, in glory. Wisdom calls us to this fact as a trigger to reorient us to the things that really matter, and as it turns out, they're the everyday things. It's funny how if you knew you were going to die tomorrow, you probably wouldn't go into work. Maybe you would, and you just work like normal. Maybe you would just do the things. In fact, one of the gals who passed away during COVID, she got cancer, and it kind of went away. And then we were meeting during COVID. And a lot of people were upset that we were meeting, but we were meeting nonetheless. And she didn't tell people how bad it had gotten. And so she just came to church. And she met with everyone. No one's meeting. And she was here. And I mean, I did the wedding for her. I did the funeral for her. Like I did, watched her grow up in her faith in a lot of ways. And so, watching her go about her life, it was interesting how she just wanted to live in the ordinary things. It was funny because it was real. Watching her after church, looking back after she died and realizing like that last year, the things she truly understood to value, because she had gone through cancer, got better, and then got again and was just like, okay, I'm that's it. And so in the final year, what was the thing she cared about? She was always after church talking to people. She wasn't talking to them about her death. No one knew. Which means, what was she talking about? The stupid stuff we talk about. The little things. Oh, I can't believe it. So-and-so's car got hit. There's a flat tire. I got to go to the thing with, it's so crazy to hear what this other thing was. And she's like, yeah, that's great. Like, there's a sense where you like appreciate that. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Like, if you start to value, the truth is that each of us is stoppable. Remember that movie, Unstoppable? He's stoppable. In fact, we all stop. Our heart stops beating. We stop moving. We stop breathing. As Whedon pointed out in his commencement address, we even start winding down just as our ambitions are all wound up. Isn't that true? The saddest thing to me always was the people that owned the most expensive bicycles were the ones least capable of using them to their potential. I used to be a cyclist at one time. And it was always the people that could really ride fast that had some duct tape on their bike. And the guys, it was always dentists that had the really nice bikes for some reason. What was it? What was the brand? It was like light. So anyways, but the dentist bike, as I always thought of it as. Not that the dentists are old, but you start to think about that like it's true, right? We say youth is wasted on the young. You go through this and we get this. The Stoic in all of us imagines that we're independent of God and each other until we're not. I love that statement, until we're not. In The Little Way of Ruth Lemming, Rod Dreher reflects, he says, contemporary culture encourages us to make islands of ourselves for the sake of self-fulfillment, of career advancement, and of entertainment, of diversion, and all the demands of the sovereign self. Well, just think about that sentence. The sovereign self. The buffered self. What does that mean? If your friends aren't going to be for you, get rid of them. What does it say? What's the famous saying? If they're not going to be for you, get rid of those friends. Go for it. You go, girl, go for it. Don't let those people that are naysayers stop you. We're going to go forward with all the things. And the sovereign self, I'm going to allow myself not to let anyone get rid of my self-fulfillment. I got to spend me time, my career advancement. It's all about me, my own entertainment. Like, how dare you take away my time? My diversions, the demands of the sovereign self. When suffering and death come for you, and it will, you want to be in a place where you know and are known. You say to yourself, well, I don't relate to that. How about when you get sick? Anyone get sick and you feel like you don't have time for that in your plans? My household is famous for this. Like, I can't afford to get sick. I'm like, I can. But think about what we say when we say that I can't afford to get sick. Is the universe going to stop functioning if you're sick? God's like, hold everything. Hold everything. Matt's not up to, pause time for him to get better. Like the idea that happens every time you get sick, it's inconvenient. And I love the fact that the inconvenience of being sick is such a small example of death, because death is always inconvenient. No one plans to do it, and yet it happens. And it seems to happen at an inopportune time, right? I didn't plan for it to happen. I mean, sometimes you might plan for it, but you shouldn't. But it happens. When the suffering and death do come, though, you want to be in a place where you know and are known. You need to be able to say, as Mike did, we're leaning on each other. Dreher's sister Ruth never left the small Louisiana town where they were raised, but lived an ordinary life of loving service in her community. And when she contracted cancer, he moved back home, leaving the dazzling heights of New York journalism. A friend tells him, everything I've done has been for career advancement. Go for the money, the good jobs. We've done well, but we're all alone in the world, he said. Almost everybody I know is like that. My family's all over the country. My kids only call if they want something. When we get old, our kids can't move back to take care of us, even if they wanted to, because we all go off to some golf resort to retire. And this is the world we've made for ourselves. I envy you that escape it. Whew. Jared adds, he says, never would I have imagined that I would spend the morning of my little sister's 43rd birthday in the graveyard, watching workmen heave her tombstone into place. But nobody ever thinks about these things when they're young. Nobody thinks about limits and how much we need each other. Oh, if you live long enough, you see suffering. It comes close to you. It shatters the illusion so dear to us of self-sufficiency, of autonomy, of control. Look, a wife and mother, a good woman in the prime of her life dying from cancer. It doesn't just happen to other people. It happens to your family. What do you do then? So the gal I told you about, Monica, who just died during COVID, that time, early on, I told the story, but it's so helpful. When the church just started off, there was a party, and the girl that at the party with us comes up to me, and we were trying to raise funds for a mission trip. And the one girl, I said, how you doing? She's like, I'm having a crazy night. I'm like, what happened? They found I had brain cancer. I'm like, that's not good. How serious? She goes, really bad. I'm like, okay. So we talked about joy. We talked about keeping a journal. We talked about expecting God to do things. But let's pray for healing. Let's pray for healing until we don't. Let's not be morose. We don't know, but let's live your life and start keeping a journal. And blesses the God of all comfort who comforts us with everything. She's like, okay. So let's talk again. We prayed. And I moved off. And so then Monica comes up to me. Monica was a go-getter, and she was basically hosting this party, and she was doing a great job. And she was so peeved that night because the people that had supposed to bring the tablecloths brought the wrong ones, and so we had mismatched tablecloths. It was a terrible thing, and it was a very real problem. But in light of what I just heard, I want to be like, who cares about tablecloths? Aren't you glad God doesn't do that to you? God, will you help me with things like, don't you know what's happening in Darfur? Shut up about your relationship problems. Have some perspective. That's literally what PTSD is, by the way. When you come back from the field where you're seeing shooting and life becomes so sort of not precious, and you see how petty it is, and you come back and see people arguing about parking spots in the mall, you're like, no one understands, you just feel really, that's what PTSD is, the juxtaposition of gravity on one hand, but remind yourself that God has the bandwidth to realize that this does matter. God cares about the drapes, he cares about things. And in Monica's case, I was able to have a moment to realize God cares about the tablecloths. And so I was fully present about her tablecloth the moment we prayed about it. I just prayed about brain cancer, and I talked to Monica about the tablecloth. She was so sweet. She was like, you're right, I didn't have a good attitude about the tablecloths. Thanks, Pastor Matt. Well, the girl with brain cancer is alive right now, 16 years later. It went away. She's married, and Monica's dead. She got cancer, and now she's dead. And I got to watch that. It's real, you know? And so the question you go back to is, did the tablecloths matter? Yes. Yes. But do they matter as a means to something else? No. In other words, the things that God gives you right now, that's real. Tonight that you have, it's an actual gift. When you guys are boxing up my books tonight, you can really enjoy serving the Lord tonight. You don't need to have it reach to something else, right? Tonight, you might say, I'm learning all these things to use somewhere else. Maybe I'm just saying things like, I've heard this before. I know everything you just said. Oh, so I guess there's no point in being told I love you again because you said it once? Can we worship God with our minds? And can we do these things it matters? And why? Because God gave us these moments. And here's the crazy part. Because of Christ, they're not wasted simply because they're going to end. Monica, I'm going to see in heaven. And she's going to know me, and I'm going to know her. And we're like, hey, remember that time? Oh, look at us. Look how much cooler we are. Psalm 90 says, teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. And what is wisdom? It's the fear of the Lord. In other words, every day, God tells you how reality is viewed from his perspective. And every day, everyone else tells you their perspective. And we're prone to relate to everyone else. And God's like, relate to my perspective. That's wisdom, to fear the Lord, to believe what I say about reality. And the final point, in case you forget, is death. It reminds you that what he says is the truth. It breaks in. Because when we hear and remember death, in one sense, we shrink a little bit. But what happens is that God and his world grow much larger. And whenever that happens, we're ready, maybe for the first time, to make the most of the ordinary. Let's pray. Father, as we sit here using ordinary words, talking out loud about things, you're doing extraordinary things. And Lord, it wasn't because anyone cried or had a moment where they raised their hand. You do amazing things through ordinary means, through speaking words out loud, by spending time together, by showing up, by driving through traffic to be present, to be seen and to see others. These things that we think of as so ordinary have eternal significance. And because we will live forever, every little investment and every little bit of gratitude is something that continues to bring you glory forever and ever. Lord, we thank you so much for the opportunity you've given us to worship you in this life. And I pray that we would truly be people of gratitude. Lord, as we go forward into the new place, help us to remember the place we're leaving was wonderfully built and ministered to us by a man who loves you and who's now dead and with you. And Father, as we go forward, many of the people in this, every single one of us will die at some point. Maybe some of us sooner than others, but help us to realize our part to play in each bit that comes forward. And help us to live that part in each moment as meaningful, re-enchanting for us the significance of it. I pray that you'd use this book in this next 3 weeks. Hopefully it's only 3 weeks or sooner, that we are apart for these Tuesday nights. You would get us all excited to come back together on 6 p.m. and you'd bless the time. We'd invite our friends and fill it up, and that you just do a ministry beyond what we can ever imagine. God, we praise you for what you're doing in our midst, that we get to do all these things, and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. We'll see you